class, we are now starting chapter 9, and chapter 9 is all about solving quadratic equations. Now you might be kind of wondering, well, like how is this any different than chapter 8? So just real quick, in chapter 8, we kind of explored the different forms of quadratics. And in chapter 7, we looked at factoring quadratics. And so now you're going to kind of, in a way, pull all of this information together into chapter 9. So chapter 9 really, I would say, is kind of the big chapter here where it's tying this information together. So you're going to hear me referring back to some of this material. Now, in chapter 8, in chapter 9, what they're going to ask you to do is solve quadratics. And so in 9.2 to 9.5, they're going to give you different methods. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, where is 9.1? Well, 9.1 is kind of its own topic, which is called radicals. So what we're going to do is we are going to skip 9.1 for right now. We're going to skip it. And we're going to actually, in a way, make it its own chapter. So we're going to come back to that one, all right? So we will do it, but we're just going to hold off. So in this chapter, we're going to be looking at the different methods. So each one of these days, they give you a different method. And then in 9.6, they give you a system. Sorry, kind of drew a blank there for a second. A system. And in the system, you have to choose your method. So these lessons are really giving you different tools and how to solve it. And when you get here, then you get to pick which one you want or you like, okay? Now, all of these lessons are going to ask you either to solve or find the zeros. So I just want to take a second and talk to you about what does it mean to find the zeros. When they're asking you to find the zero of a function, they're really asking you for the solution. They want you to solve it. So if you see the word solve and if you see the word zeros, that's really the same thing. And now again, what does that even mean? What does it mean to find the solution of a quadratic? Well, what it really means is where does the quadratic cross? So what they're asking you is, what are the locations that it crosses? What are these numbers? Okay? And so if we look at number 1, do you remember this form? This is called intercept form. We learned that in chapter 8. And so intercept form. If you're given intercept, you should be really happy because all you have to do is set your parentheses equal to 0. And then you have your two solutions. So if we set it equal to 0 and then we move the 2 to the other side, we have -2. And if we set the second one to 0 and we move the 5 over, there are our two solutions. So that means this quadratic is crossing at -2 and at 5. Now we don't have to find the y value because the y value would be 0. Notice they're crossing on the axis. So there's no need to give me the y value. You just simply have to give the x solutions. So if you're given intercept form, you should be like, oh, this is great. Now look over here. This is called vertex form. Now vertex form sometimes can be a little harder because your brain wants to pull out the h and the k. So your brain wants to pull this out and it wants to say that it's -7, 0. That's the vertex. Well, in this particular case, the vertex is also the answer. Notice it's right on -7, 0. So if we go over -7 would maybe put us way over here. So -7, 0. And notice it's a +4. So do you see how it's going up like that? You notice how it's crossing right there. Now, if they would have given you vertex form that was a little larger, like let's say it looked like this, like that. Now that would be, well, that one would actually be a no solution. Let me say on -3. Let me say -3. I just kind of made that up. So you'd go over -7, and then you'd go down -3, and so this would be your vertex, and then it would graph like that. Now that would be a lot harder to find these two locations. Hence, really the need for lessons 9.2 to 9.5. That's really why you need this chapter. But in this first one, since our k is 0, that is our solution. That is our 0. So in this particular case, the vertex is also the answer, okay? But a problem like this we'll talk more about as we go, okay? So now let's take a look at number 3. Now, if you notice, number 3 is in standard. So this is in standard form. Now, I know you know how to find the vertex. Remember that the vertex is opposite b over 2a. That's the vertex. We don't want the vertex. What we want to know is, where does this cross? And so the easiest thing to do, because there's only 2 terms, is just simply set this to 0, because we're trying to see where it crosses, and solve it like you would any algebra problem. Move the 12 to the other side. So I have 12 is equal to 3x squared. And then I would divide by 3. And I would get x squared to be 4. And then I could just take the square root of both sides. And I would get plus or minus 2. So basically what you're telling me is that this thing is going to cross at positive 2 and at negative 2. Now, if you want, I can calculate you the vertex, but really this chapter is only asking you, where does it cross? And so this is all you would need to give. Again, if you want, I can find the vertex. I can do that. That's no problem, but they're not asking me for it, okay? So you'll kind of see how some of the materials from chapter 7 and 8 can come back. Now, before I move on to number 4, I want you to notice that I had an x squared and a constant. Now look at number 4. Do you see how I have an x squared and I have a minus 2x? If I try to do the same thing, if I try to put a 0 here, now I'm going to switch to a separate piece of paper because this isn't going to work, but I want to show it to you. If I move the 2x to the other side, so if I move the 2x over here and then I get x squared, well, now what am I supposed to do? I have an x and an x squared, so I'm stuck. See, over here it worked because that was a constant, and so I can divide constants. But over here, I have too many letters, so that method isn't going to work. But what I do, I still set it to 0, but now I'm going to go back to my chapter 7. And in chapter 7, we told you or showed you how to pull out the greatest common factor. So if you take a look at the greatest common factor, notice they both have an x. So we're going to pull the x out. And if we pull an x out of each of these, we're going to be left with x minus 2. Well, now this almost looks like number 1, where I have my parentheses. So all I have to do now is set each of these equal to 0. So I just go 0 is equal to x, and 0 is equal to x minus 2. See, I'm just setting each piece equal to 0. Now this one's done. I don't have to do anything else. This one's done. But this one, I just have to move the 2 to the other side, and so I get x to be 2. So once again, if I were to graph this, all this is simply telling me is that it's crossing at 0 and it's crossing at 2. Now I can tell you that it's opening up, and I can tell you that this is the axis of symmetry, and I'm assuming that the vertex is down here, but I don't need that. These are my 2 solutions, okay? Or my zeros. Remember, a 0 and a solution is really the same thing, so it doesn't matter which word they use, okay? Now notice as I'm going through the paper, we're giving you the different forms. So we're going through intercept, vertex, now standard. Now standard is much more complicated because we can have some different scenarios. Notice we have a binomial, and now we have a trinomial, okay? So once again, I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm going to try to pull out a greatest common factor, but there isn't one. So if there's no greatest common factor, I just have to figure out my combinations. So this is really going back to chapter 7. And I believe that this would be lesson maybe 7.5 where you learn how to factor. Now notice this does not have a coefficient, so we're just going to do x times x. And then 20 is going to be what? Maybe 10 times 2, or maybe 5 times 4. But 5 times 4 would get me 9. So I'm going to use 5 times 4. And notice my signs are the same. So I'm going to look back, and they're both going to be addition signs. And now that I have this factor, if I check my outer 4, inner 5, yep, I got the 9, I just solve it. So I'm just going to set each one equal to 0. So 0 equals x plus 5, and 0 equals x plus 4. And then if I move the 5 over, and if I move the 4 over, there are my 2 solutions. But once again, that's just telling me where it crosses. So 2, 3, 4. It crosses at -4, and it crosses at -5. Man, this would be a really tight parabola. Notice it's positive, so it's probably going something like this. They are not going to ask you guys to graph them. Well, sort of. The first lesson is solving by graphing, but this is kind of the idea, okay? All right, let's try number 6. Now, I don't want you to pause this and try this on your own. I want you to walk through it with me. I'm going to put a 0 right here, and notice there's no greatest common factor. And so I'm just going to go 0 equals, and then I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to say, okay, x squared is x times x. And 5 is a prime number, so that means I go 5 times 1. And then I look at this and I see my symbols must be the same, and when I look back, they're both additions. And then I check my outers and my inners, and so I check and I get a 1x and I get a 5x, which is 6x. Not the right number. Uh-oh, what do I do? There's nothing for me to switch because this is a prime number. So this one right here, it's not a no solution. It does cross, but guess what? It crosses at decimals. So it's not going to cross at perfect numbers. It's going to cross somewhere at decimals, okay? And so now we have to figure out, well, how are we going to do that? So that's really what the next lesson is all about. That's really what 9.2 is kind of talking about, okay? Now I'm going to come back to that paper. So I'm just going to move this paper off to the side, and I'm going to come back to that. But in a sense, in a way, that's kind of what chapter 9 is about. Chapter 9 is about how do we solve these equations, these quadratic equations, when you can't factor. So now they're going to give you some different methods. So from 9.2 is graphing, and then in 9.3 up to 9.5, they're going to show you the different methods. And remember, as I said, when you get to 9.6, you get to pick. So it'll be your choice, okay? So let's just take a quick look at 7. If you were to be given a picture like this, you can physically just look at the picture and you can see where it crosses. And so if you can physically see from the picture where it crosses, then you just have to write down the answers. So the answer is, hey, it crosses right here at -3, and it crosses right here at +1, and those are my 2 solutions. Notice I didn't even do anything with this equation, but I could try to factor this, but the question why? I already have the answer. So if you're given a picture, be super happy and just grab your answers and move on, okay? Now if you do number 8, notice the same thing, only this time it only crosses once. So there's only one answer, and that's just a 4, okay? So sometimes you have multiple answers and sometimes you have one, and you might even see a no solution, okay? And that's all right too. So I want to now show you kind of how to do some of this by graphing. So if we take a look at number 9, the first thing we have to do is we do have to move this 3 to the other side. So we're going to move the 3 over, like that. And now if you like factoring, so if you really like factoring, you can go ahead and try to get your combinations and set it equal to 0 and then solve it. But let's say you're like, man, I didn't really care for factoring. I'm going to show you 2 different ways. I'm going to show you how to do it in the graphing calculator. And then for those of you who don't have a graphing calculator, I'm going to show you another application as well. Okay? So in the graphing calculator, you go to your y equals. And if you have anything in here, go ahead and clear it out. And then you're going to want to type this in. So you're going to want to type in x squared plus 2x minus 3. And then you're going to want to set the second one to 0. Now the second one to 0 only matters if our answer comes out to be decimals. So I'll show you one with decimals in a minute. But go ahead and hit graph. And so it's going to graph it for you. So there's your parabola. Now you're going to see the 0 come in red. You can kind of see the 0 going across the bottom on mine. If your calculator is not in color, you may not notice that. But you can see now I have a red line that goes across at 0. Okay? Now this particular one crosses at nice numbers. Do you notice how it crosses at a -3 and it crosses at a +1? So we don't really need to do any more work in the calculator. So, hey, there's my answer right there. And if you would have factored it, you probably would have noticed that the factor looks like that. And so notice how it's a -3 and a +1. Okay, so let me go back to the other problem here. Gotta find my paper. Right here. Okay, let's go back to this one. Remember how we had some problems here and we're like, oh man, this didn't work. Well, how are we going to get the answer? So now let's try this graphing calculator thing again. So we're going to go back to our y equals, and we're going to clear out the first one, and we're going to do x squared plus 8x plus 5, and we're going to keep the second one at 0, and then we're going to hit graph. And look at that. Do you see how it's crossing at decimals? Do you see how it's not crossing really good? Well, my eyes can't see that exactly. Like, I definitely can tell you that it's between 0 and -1, but I don't know the exact decimal. And so we've done this before, so I'll try to go slow here. But what you're going to do is you're going to go second, calculate, and you're going to go down to the word intersect, and you're going to hit enter. And you're going to get this blinking star that comes up. And you're just going to want to move the blinking star kind of close by the intersection. It doesn't have to be right on, but close. And then you're going to hit enter 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. And do you see right at the bottom of my window screen, it might be kind of hard because of the glare, but at the bottom of my window screen, let me see if I can kind of tilt it. Do you see how it's a -0.68? So this one spot over here, right on this side, was a -0.68. Now we have this other spot where it crossed over here too. So we know it has these 2 spots. So what we're going to do is repeat the process. So we're going to go second, calculate, go down to the word intersect, and hit enter. And now move your little blinking star, and it doesn't have to be right on. It just has to be close. You can kind of see mine. See how I moved it all the way over here? You can see it kind of blinking. Once you get it close, you hit enter 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And now you can kind of see, again, there's a little bit of a glare, but it's a -7.3, say 2. So then this other point right here would be a -7, say 0.32. Now at any time, if I went too fast, especially because this is a video, you can definitely stop it and pause and catch up or rewind if you need to. Now this is using the graphing calculator, and so it's a great tool, especially if we're in class, it's really good. But since you're at home, I want to show you something else. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same problem. So here's a website called Desmos, and it's free. So if you want to jot this name down, again, you can pause the video. But if you go to Desmos and you just click on Start Graphing, right over here in this box, you can type in the equation. So I'm going to type in, you can just type in y equals if you want. You don't even have to type the 0, but you can just type in y equals, and then you got to type in x squared, and you have to use that little caret key. Okay, you got to use that little caret key there. And then we do plus 8x plus 5. So that's the same problem we were just looking at. Now all you have to do is take your mouse and look at it. Hover right over top. Boom. Boom. There are the two answers. Those are the same two answers that we have right here on our paper. But look at how much easier this is. It's so much easier. Now, when we're in class, we're not allowed to use computers, so we wouldn't be able to do that. We'd have to do it on the graphing calculator. But since you guys are at home, man, this is a great tool to use. All you got to do is hover over top, and it gives you the two answers, okay? So I'll try another one. So let me just minimize this for just a second, and I'll bring it right back up, okay? So I could easily type this one in just to kind of show you. So I'll go ahead and type this same one in here just to show you that it still does work. So I go here and I type in x squared plus 2x minus 3. Now, do you notice I didn't even type the y equals, or I could type in equals 0. Actually, I guess I don't want to do equals 0, do I? I would want to put equals y because it gives me the parabola then. But notice it's the same, or just leave this part off. Don't even put the equals part. And look at, hover right over top, and you get a 1, and you get a negative 3. So again, if I minimize this, same answer. So why don't you try these other three? You can try them in whatever way you want. I honestly think Desmos might be your best option. But if you want to practice with the graphing calculator, if you want to practice factoring by hand, whatever way you want to practice, go ahead. But why don't you pause the video here and give them a try. All right, hopefully you paused it. On number 10, the answer came out to be, it crosses at -5 and +1, okay? And probably, again, the easiest way for me just to show you this would be just in Desmos because it's really quick. So 2x squared plus 8x minus 10, and then I get the -5 and the 1, okay? All right, and then number 11, I'm going to go ahead and just type number 11 in. Wait a minute, what's happening on number 11? It doesn't cross, but is it still a parabola? Does it have a vertex? So it still is a parabola. It still is a quadratic. It just never crosses. It never crosses, and so we would say no solution. Do not say 0, because 0 would be like this. 0 would be that it crosses and then goes back up. So don't say 0. You want to say no solution, okay? All right, and then number 12. Number 12 was really the reason I wanted to show you Desmos. And number 12, do you see how nasty the decimals were? So we had x squared plus 4x plus 1. Look at how nasty these decimals are. But that's okay. You can just round. So it's about a negative. If you want to write down the whole thing, it's only 3 decimals. It's no big deal. And then if I go over here, I get a negative 3.732. Okay, so notice those are my two solutions. So on my paper, notice how I just wrote down the two solutions, and that would be my answer. So again, I'll just put this back up here. It's called Desmos, and it's a free online site. I definitely, if I was you, I would bookmark it, I would star it, something like that, because this is a really good site for you to use, okay? So remember that in the next couple lessons, they're going to be showing you different methods. So you might really like this one. Sometimes I like to teach this one last because once people see this one, this is the only one they want to use. But they're going to show you different methods. And then when you get to 9-6, you get to pick. And so if you really like this one, we will revisit it. All right, that concludes lesson 9-2.